Hello, this is Virtualis the Chess Noob, learning and having fun with chess. When playing with the black pieces and facing an e4 player, it's not uncommon to come across the Ruy-Lopez opening. The Ruy-Lopez is one of the oldest documented openings in chess and can lead to some dynamic and complex games. As I don't play the Ruy-Lopez opening, I have little knowledge of its opening theory. However, I managed to hold my own in the game that I played yesterday. So let's have a quick look at the review first. So the algorithm started well, big blunder here in the middle that led to equality, but then I managed to come out ahead again. The accuracy of 84.3% is not too bad, sort of a mix of reasonably good moves, some inaccuracies and mistakes, and we shared a blunder each. So let's have a look at the analysis. Alrighty, so starts with e4, e5, and then knight to f3. So fairly normal setup. I respond with the knight to c6. And then the Ruy-Lopez starts proper with the move bishop to b5, attacking that knight. Now in these positions, what I usually do is I play the Berlin, which involves developing the other knight. And basically, I just don't have a particular way of playing the Ruy-Lopez opening. So I normally just try to develop my pieces, control the center, castles early, so just normal developing moves. Opponent pushes their d pawn to d4, I suppose immediately fighting for the center. I capture back, captures, and that allows me now to capture the e4 pawn as well. So I'm now materially a little bit ahead. It's not entirely clear how the opponent is going to get that material back. Knight captures knight, take back with an attack on the bishop. Opponent attempts to pin the knight and threaten the knight, but that's okay. I'm happy to trade a knight for a bishop, and that also helped me undouble my pawns. Captures, and now my queen pins the opponent's queen to the king, so a queen trade is now inevitable. And at the end of the opening, I think I'm quite a bit ahead. I have the bishop pair, I have one bishop developed, I have one pawn developed. The opponent, all their pieces are still on the back rank, and none of their pawns are developed. Castles, and here we start to develop some pieces in the middle game. Now the opponent is threatening my bishop there. However, I can now pin their bishop to their rook, and in fact, if they chose to take, this would in fact be checkmate. It's never too late to hang, back rank mate. Develops. I was happy to trade some pieces here. And so at the end of the exchange, I'm still up slightly on material. I have the bishop and the rook compared to a knight and a rook. And my pawns are in a better position. So these three pawns are split. I try to protect that pawn, move that pawn as well. And at this point, the opponent decides to push that pawn forward. Now that is a mistake, given I can capture back, I can capture that pawn, and the opponent cannot capture, given it's protected by the bishop. So that now puts me 2 pawns ahead of the opponent. Now the opponent potentially, whoops, let's try that again, potentially trying to attack that bishop 2 ways. So I need to prevent that that knight move, so I decide to push that pawn here. Attack the knight, kick it out of the way, and here I can now have the rook behind the pawn, so that pawn can now be pushed forward. That doesn't do very much. And I do have to be careful though of not forking my pieces. Now, at this point, I make a serious blunder. My plan was to, advance the pawn and then flip my rook over to the d file, and then here, and this would pretty much guarantee the capture of the opponent's rook, or they need to suffer a pawn promotion to queen. However, for some reason, I thought I had already advanced the pawn before moving the rook out of the way, so that was completely silly. Opponent captures back, and we are now pretty much close to equality. I was not unhappy with that trade, I have to admit, because in this position I have more pawns. The king is very far away from this pawn, which is the one closest to promotion. I thought I had good chances. And my goal here now is I should be able to capture at least one, if not both, of those pawns. The opponents are trying to attack that pawn. That doesn't really achieve much since the pawn can just move forward and the king is still protected by a fortress. Here, I decide to make this move first to basically force the king away from my pawns. Captures. Now the opponent is giving room for that pawn to promote, but from my calculation, they don't have enough time. So I move here, they move there, captures, down there with check, king moves out of the way, and then the king, so the rook slides over to the A file just in time to stop promotion. And that's in fact what happens. So I was very happy with having calculated that move. And the computer reckons it's a great move. Move the rook out of the way. And now time to advance the king with the fortress of pawns. The opponent was probably cheekily hoping that I would capture and forget that that pawn can promote. However, in reality, they've just hung that pawn out of the way. Here, I didn't see before I moved that I could potentially incite a trade of rooks, which would be very advantageous to me. So move the king right back, repeated moves, but the opponent chose not to bite. But it doesn't really matter. I can now move the pawn. And now with that pawn all the way to h2, pretty much it is impossible for the opponent to stop that pawn without trading itself. So a pawn for rook trade is now inevitable. So they can do that. Rook now defends. The king is too far away. Move the king forward. Now with the next move, that rook is trapped and must be traded. And now it's a matter of advancing that final pawn. And we can achieve a ladder mate. And the opponent opts to resign rather than accept the last move. GG, I enjoyed this game. Thank you to the opponent. In this game, White played the opening inaccurately, leading to them being down a pawn after an early trade in pieces. One of the learnings that I took away is that it's important to know your opening well, at least for the first few moves. The Ruy Lopez opening is quite complicated with many variations, so it isn't the easiest to learn. Early and unnecessary loss of a pawn can result in an ongoing disadvantage for the rest of the game, with an evenly matched player. Thanks for watching.